Mr. Chair, yes, thank you. For the record, my name is Judy Randall. I am the Deputy Legislative Auditor for OLA's Program Evaluation Division. With me is Cecile Ferkel, who is the Deputy Legislative Auditor for the Financial Audit Division, and Joel Alter, who was the manager of our program evaluation. We're here today to report on two reports that we're releasing, or that we released this morning, our evaluation report and our financial audit report of the Purbridge Center for Arts Education. As you likely know, the Purbridge Center is kind of a unique state agency. When it was created in 1985, it began providing statewide arts education outreach. In the late 1980s, it began operating the Arts High School in Golden Valley, and then in 2013, it began operating Crosswinds Middle School in Woodbury. So it's a state agency with statewide outreach responsibilities, but then also specific responsibilities for operating two schools. Unfortunately, today, both of the reports we are presenting to you have broad and significant concerns related to all aspects of the agency. As Mr. Alter will tell you, we found significant problems with board oversight. We found significant problems with agency leadership and management. We found weak test scores and declining enrollment. Ms. Ferkel will tell you about inadequate internal controls and poor financial management. In other words, unfortunately, we found a lot to be concerned about. As you may know, the executive director of the Purbridge Center retired earlier this month. However, the findings we identified did not leave with her. Instead, they remain for the board, the new executive director, and for you, the legislature, to resolve. At this point, I'd like to turn to Mr. Alter to talk more about our findings and recommendations related to the program evaluation, and then Ms. Ferkel will follow talking about our financial audit report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Alter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And for the record, my name is Joel Alter, and I was the manager of the program evaluation on the Purbridge Center. I should also clarify, you got two reports today in your packets, and just to avoid confusion, the one that I'm going to be talking about is the one with the darker blue cover. The financial audit has the lighter blue cover, otherwise they look a lot alike. But there may be some points where we reference some things in the report. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge Jody Munson Rodriguez, who was my colleague on this evaluation. As Judy was suggesting, the Purbridge Center for Arts Education is a relatively small state agency. It has about 100 employees, an annual budget of about $11 million a year. But there have been concerns that have brought to us and others in recent years, and so we took an in-depth look at this agency's leadership and certain aspects of its operations. What did we conclude overall? Well, our report says that the Purbridge Center's governing board has not provided the agency with enough direction and oversight. The board has not been sufficiently transparent and accessible to the public in its activities. Our report says there has been widespread employee concern about the agency's administrative leadership, which has contributed to a morale issue in the agency. And we'll talk in a moment about the schools that the Purbridge Center operates, but we concluded that one of those schools, called Crosswinds, has struggled during its time under Purbridge Center management. And we found that the agency has fulfilled some, but not all, of the requirements in statute for the agency to provide statewide outreach to schools related to arts education. Before we get to the findings, I'd like to provide a little bit of background and begin by reviewing the agency's main areas of responsibility. First, the agency provides statewide outreach to support arts education in schools across Minnesota. The Purbridge Center started providing this type of assistance immediately after the agency was created in 1985. In fact, the commitment to do statewide outreach, I think, was really a critical factor in getting legislative support to create this agency. A second area of responsibility is the Arts High School in Golden Valley. This school was another key component when the legislature created the agency. It did take a few years for the agency to take the necessary steps to get students enrolled and the doors opened at the Arts High School. There are a couple of unique things about the Arts High School. It has a competitive admissions process, and that's unlike other public high schools in Minnesota. It also has the ability to house students in a dormitory that's on the Golden Valley campus. The school has been a 2-year high school since it was created. It serves grades 11 and 12. And a third area of responsibility is more recent. The 2014 legislature gave the Perpich Center responsibility for an existing school, Crosswinds Arts and Science School in Woodbury. Well before the Perpich Center took over Crosswinds, it was created to help foster cultural, racial, and ethnic integration among students, and this school serves grades 6 through 10. Now, some people might ask, why do we have a state agency that is all about arts education? Well, one reason has been to provide additional options for students who can't find what they need in their local schools. The Arts High School, as I said, can enroll students from across Minnesota. Crosswinds School has a somewhat more limited reach. This year it has students from 13 school districts. But the agency also exists to strengthen arts programs in students' home districts. Not every school can offer classes in things like dance or media arts or theater, and the Perpich Center can help schools comply with state standards in the arts, or it can help broaden their course offerings or provide opportunities for professional development of teachers. In recent years, the Perpich Center has also tried to use the arts to promote not only the artistic development of students, but also to promote their academic achievement and development. A majority of the Perpich Center's funding has come from general fund appropriations. That funding has been flat for many years, as shown in the yellow line on the chart in front of you. The red line shows the agency's appropriations in $2,000, in other words, adjusted for inflation. And with that adjustment, you can see that the agency has had to support its activities with fewer general fund dollars over time. When the agency took over Crosswinds School in 2014, it did begin receiving state education aid for that school that isn't reflected in this chart. But what this chart, I think, illustrates is that the agency has had diminishing funds in real dollars for the original functions of the agency, that is, running the Arts High School and providing statewide outreach. The Perpich Center is governed by a 15-member board, and according to statute, this board has all of the agency's formal authority. Board members are appointed by the governor to 4-year terms. State law does not require appointees to the Perpich board to have any particular skills or experience, but the law does say that there must be at least one member from each of Minnesota's 8 congressional districts. I think it's worth noting that of the 14 members that are currently on the board, there's a vacancy, but of the 14 current members, 9 have been appointed in just the last 6 months. So this is a changing board, and in many ways the current board is different from the one that was in place a year ago or during much of the period that we looked at for this evaluation. I want to turn next to our findings, and oops, I think I need to, let me see if I can get back to where I was quickly. I'll talk while I'm going ahead here. What we found related to the governing board, and again, what we said is that the governing board really is the authority of the agency. And we found that the board's oversight of the agency has been fairly inactive in recent years and overall weak. There are references in board policies to the agency's strategic plan and annual goals, but the board hasn't adopted a plan or goals for about 9 years. And without those kinds of agreed upon goals, it's hard for the board to hold the agency accountable or to determine its progress. Board policy says that the board is supposed to annually review the executive director of the agency and his or her performance, but in fact the board has not done those reviews very frequently in recent years. And in our view, this has been a missed opportunity, particularly in light of some of the management issues that we're going to be talking about in a moment. As mentioned, the board runs 2 schools, but the board has played a fairly limited role in their oversight. For example, the board has not reviewed school policies or school handbooks, and our observations of the board's oversight of and approval of the school budgets are that that process, at least this last year, was quite superficial. The board has a policy that requires it to review the Perpich Center budget proposals before they're submitted to the legislature. We think that if the board really wants to put its stamp on the budget proposals, it should be involved earlier in the process before they go to the legislature. So when those proposals are being submitted to the governor and to MMB for possible inclusion in the governor's budget, that's really when the board can have an impact. And it hasn't done that based on our review. And finally, we note that the board has met less frequently in recent years, and the board's committees have not met very often at all. And again, that might be all right if this were an advisory board, but I think we have to keep reminding ourselves that the Perpich board is a governing board. In addition, the board has not solicited very much public input or been particularly transparent in recent years. For example, in looking at board records from the beginning of 2014 through September of 2016, 20 business meetings during that period, but only 3 of them provided an opportunity for public comment. Another issue is that the board did not, until very recently, post its meeting minutes on its website, and that certainly made it harder for parents or other stakeholders to monitor what the board was doing. Also, the board has had a policy that that meeting minutes should be developed for all of the committee meetings, but we found that in about 30% of the cases, there were no meeting minutes for the committee meetings. In addition, until recently, the only way for the public to contact board members was through an email on the agency's website that went not directly to the board members, but to one of the administrative staff for the agency. Within the past couple of months, however, the board did add ways for people to directly contact board members. So overall, while the Perpich Center Board is not in statute subject to the statutes that govern, let's say, school boards or charter school boards, we think it's, again, important to remind ourselves that this agency does oversee 2 schools. And for that reason, it's important for the agency and for the board in particular to be accessible to parents and the public and very transparent in its actions. Aside from the board, we found problems with the performance of Perpich administrative officials. Back in May of 2016, when we were beginning this evaluation, we sent emails to each employee of the Perpich Center, including the school employees. We informed them about the agencies that we were looking at, and we invited them to provide us with observations, compliments, complaints, suggestions. As a result of that, we heard from a lot of people, and the comments we heard were overwhelmingly negative about Perpich management and about the work environment at the agency. And as Ms. Randall noted, less than 3 weeks ago, the person who has been serving as executive director of the agency for about 7 years stepped down. And some people might say, well, if that person was a part of the problem, doesn't her departure solve the management problems? And I think what we would say to that is it's going to take some hard work to move forward. There are problems at the agency. The agency needs direction. It needs better communication. It needs cohesiveness within the different parts of the agency. And it needs transparency in practices. And those are not going to magically happen overnight just with a change in personnel. I did it again. I'm back to the beginning, and I'll see if I can get back quickly again. The next point I was going to make that is a management issue and that we'll be talking about a little more when I turn things over to Ms. Ferkel is that we're going to be talking about a financial audit that's coming out today. And that financial audit suggests that there have been continuing challenges with financial compliance and internal controls. And so I think that is also an indication of a management issue. Another issue that we noted is the agency's budget, which we found has lacked clarity and detail. And in addition to that, it's important to note is that as we talk to teachers and managers within the agency, many of them did not know the size of their budgets. That's another indication of a weakness in communication and in financial management. In addition, employees have had ongoing concerns that they don't feel as if they know the agency's administrative policies or even how to access those policies. And while that may seem like a fairly straightforward thing to address, it has been an employee concern for many years at the Perpich Center. Next, I want to turn to a discussion about the schools, the Arts High School and Crosswinds. But before getting into each of those schools, I want to mention one issue that kind of cuts across the lines for the schools, a statutory issue. And specifically, there are no statutory provisions related to the qualifications of the persons who are the school leaders. There are no requirements for Perpich to have a superintendent, even though, for example, with school districts, if there is a school district that operates a high school, it is required by law to have a superintendent. But again, Perpich is not a school district. There are also no requirements in statute related to the qualifications of persons serving as principals of the Perpich Center schools. In contrast, there are statutory provisions related to the principals of independent school districts, charter schools, even the Minnesota State Academies for the Blind and Deaf. And those statutes address whether those people must be licensed or whether they have to have certain knowledge or skills or training. And I should mention that in recent years, the Perpich Center has not had a person acting in the role of superintendent, and they have two principals of the schools, one of which does not have an administrative license. Turning to the Arts High School, this is a school that has been around for 28 years. It is a place that nurtures the artistic talent and creativity of high school students, and I'll put up on the screen a few examples of the art and the skills of Arts High School students. Many of these students pursue college after high school, and while they're at Perpich, many of them do well in state arts competitions. Some of them have received some really good college scholarships. So these are talented kids at the Arts High School. But we noted that the Arts High School's enrollment has declined in recent years. State law limits the Arts High School to 310 students, and the school had nearly that number when it started the school year in 2011. Since that time, the first day enrollments have dropped fairly steadily, and we don't know for sure why that is. Is it because the Perpich Center hasn't worked hard enough to recruit students, or is it that there is more competition from charter schools that didn't exist 10, 20 years ago, or even the home school districts of some of these students may be providing more things that meet their needs. So we don't know exactly why the enrollment has declined. We did observe that we didn't see much discussion by the board in recent months or recent years about the decline or the reasons for it until, I would say, fairly recently by the board. And so I think that's, again, some evidence that the board has not been particularly active in overseeing the schools. In addition, the Arts High School has not been attracting as many students from outstate Minnesota as it once did. State law says that the Perpich Center Board, quote, must plan for the enrollment of pupils on an equal basis from each congressional district. So does that mean that the Arts High School has to have equal numbers from each part of the state? I think that language in statute is open to a little bit of interpretation, but we observed that 78% of the current students at the Arts High School are from the 7-county Twin Cities area. And in fact, there's one congressional district in Minnesota that does not have a single student currently enrolled at the Arts High School. And that's been a change over time. Also, we examined the Arts High School students' performance on the one state-required standardized test that it administers, again, keeping in mind the Arts High School only has students in 11th and 12th grade. So for 11th grade math scores, it's true that a lot of what students have learned and are going to be tested on in 11th grade is going to be determined by the time they get to Perpich. Perpich has them for 11th grade before they're tested in the spring of their 11th grade year. In 2016, only 18% of the tested students at the Arts High School were deemed proficient on the math test, and that compares with a statewide average of 47%. And we also note in the report that in 2014, the Perpich Center did not administer this required test to Arts High School students. In addition, we found that attendance policies at the Arts High School have not been enforced in at least the past two complete academic years. Parents and students are supposed to receive notification when multiple unexcused absences occur. And we heard some levels of frustration from teachers and others at the school about the lack of enforcement, because I think there's a feeling that that has affected the culture and the rigor at the school. One other fact that I think is worth noting about the Arts High School, and it certainly has some relationship to the decline in enrollment, the average cost per student at the Arts High School last year was more than $20,000 per student per year. Among other public schools, the average is about $11,500, other schools in the state. And I think this is an important topic, because some people, I know there have been some bills in past years to convert the Arts High School to a charter school. But when we're looking at a current cost of $20,000 per student, that's pretty tough to, with just the revenues that come to a charter school, to try to cover those types of costs. I want to turn next to a discussion about the Crosswinds School. And before we talk about some of the issues that we raised in our report, I want to say a few words about the school's history. The school started in 1998. Some school districts at that time, which later became known as the East Metro Integration District, or EMID, jointly established the Crosswinds School. And it was, for a couple of years, it was in St. Paul. And this school was intended from the beginning to be a magnet for students of different cultural, racial, and ethnic backgrounds. The legislature then provided more than $20 million in bonds to establish a permanent school building, and that building was completed in Woodbury, and that's where the school is today. For a period of years, EMID operated 2 schools, one of which was Crosswinds, for the purpose of promoting voluntary integration. But over time, the member districts of EMID began questioning whether they wanted to be in the business of running schools, and wondered whether they should be using that money for other purposes. And so EMID started looking at other options for Crosswinds, and eventually voted in 2013 to support a transfer of Crosswinds to the Perpich Center. The legislature did not act in 2013 to transfer the official authority, but it did do so in 2014. So how has Crosswinds fared under the Perpich Center? Well, unfortunately, the enrollment has not rebounded to the levels that existed during the years when EMID ran the school. And keep in mind that there was a lot of uncertainty going back to 2012 and 2013 about the school's future. And so there were parents who moved their kids out of the school because they weren't sure whether Crosswinds was going to continue. So as you can see, the last year that EMID ran the school, in green you can see that the enrollment was about 349. The first year that Perpich began managing the school, the enrollment had declined to 172. And Perpich officials at the time of the conveyance to Perpich testified that they expected to grow the school by about 50 students per year. But as you can see from the trend lines, that hasn't happened. Enrollment remained fairly stable under Perpich management during the first 3 years, and then enrollment in the fall of 2016 dropped quite a bit. As of October 1st, it was at 129. And I think the point here is that that's really not a good direction for a school that was already struggling to survive. Likewise, student test scores have not been going in the right direction. And this next chart shows in green the percentage of students who are deemed proficient the last year that the school was under EMID. So these would have been the spring 2013 test scores. And you can compare that in red with the most recent, that is the spring 2016 test scores under Perpich's management. In science, reading, and math, the test scores have gone down, and compared with other schools in the state and with the goals that have been set by Perpich, that level of performance has not been a strong one. There has been significant staff turnover at Crosswinds since Perpich began managing it. There have been 4 principals in 4 years. Many of the staff and teachers have left and been replaced, and in a number of cases, teachers have said they felt under-supported. Like the Arts High School, Crosswinds is an expensive school. It has a relatively high cost per student. In fact, the Perpich Center general fund appropriation has, in some cases, had to supplement the aid, the per pupil aid that Crosswinds has received, because that aid just hasn't covered the cost of operating Crosswinds. And in fact, as we'll note in a moment, some of the costs of paying for the Crosswinds staff and its other expenses has come out of the Perpich Center's outreach budget that's supposed to be used to support schools around the state. I do want to mention that Crosswinds officials have put in a number of new efforts during the current school year to try to improve staff training and to improve the educational options for students. And maybe those efforts are going to pay off. Maybe they will lead to improved enrollment or test scores. We just don't know. It's too early to know. But I do think it's fair to say that the first 3 years under the Perpich Center's management have been a disappointment and have raised questions about the school's viability. And then the final area that we looked at is the Perpich Center's statewide outreach to support arts education throughout the state. And I want to just touch on the main programs that Perpich operates in this area. First is Turnaround Arts. This is a national program, and the Perpich Center currently administers this program in Minnesota in 8 schools that historically had low levels of student performance. Perpich tries to infuse the arts into these schools to foster school-wide improvement. The Arts Integration Program is for selected schools in certain parts of the state. In this program, teams of teachers develop individual lessons that combine the arts and other subjects. So it's a little bit more limited focus. Perpich has provided funding to support what are called regional centers in some parts of the state. And in these cases, a host school district coordinates training and professional development for teachers and for schools in that region. And then Perpich has employed over the years education specialists who give tailored expertise and assistance to schools and school districts. Perpich used to have these specialists in each arts area, but it currently has only one full-time employee doing this particular activity. We think there have been some positive effects of Perpich's outreach efforts. Several years ago, Perpich staff worked with state officials to develop and draft the statewide art standards, and Perpich staff have helped individual school districts implement those standards. But we also noted that there are a number of outreach areas that are mandated in state law that the agency is not implementing. For example, the agency is supposed to offer summer arts institutes for students in grades 9 through 12, and that hasn't happened for quite a few years. And again, maybe this reflects the tighter funding that the agency has had as its state appropriation has eroded over time. In addition, the Perpich Center's efforts don't reach a real high percentage of the state's teachers in any given year. And we heard from many arts teachers or representatives of arts teachers that they would like more help. For example, the Perpich Center has not had a music specialist on staff in several years, and that's the area that accounts for the largest number or the largest share of arts teachers around the state. The Perpich Center, I think, deserves credit for initiating outside evaluations of many of its outreach activities, and those evaluations have shown some positive things based on surveys and observations. We don't know much from those evaluations about any impacts on student achievement, and excuse me, I think national studies have raised some questions about whether arts education should be expected to have large impacts. The studies have generally shown mixed results. So turning to the recommendations that we have for the agency, and we have a complete list on pages 91 and 92 of that report with the darker cover. I'm just going to touch on a few of the highlights. We think that the Perpich Center should provide clearer direction to the agency. The board should provide clearer direction to the agency and provide stronger oversight. It should set goals and hold the agency accountable. The board should take steps to ensure greater public input and participation. Meeting minutes should be posted online, as should meeting materials. There should be more opportunities for public comments at meetings. Board policy requires annual evaluations of the executive director, and we think the board should abide by that policy. The board should receive periodic reports on school activities, on enrollment, and on measures of school success. And in general, the board should be more active in reviewing school activities. The agency should comply with what the statutes require, and if those statutes need to be updated, then the board and the agency should be coming to legislators with suggestions for changes. As far as recommendations to the legislature, we think the legislature should consider changes in the Perpich Board's role, size, and composition. But this is an area where we provide kind of the pros and cons to that. We think there's not, enough of an argument for us to recommend outright that the legislature make changes. But for example, it's a fairly large board, 15 members. It's larger than most state boards. Maybe it should be smaller. There's certainly a case for that. Maybe the legislature should specify in statute certain skills that it would like to see on the Perpich Center board. But we also caution that these kinds of statutory changes to the size or the composition or the appointment process of the board, they're not a panacea. I think the most important changes that we recommend in this report are ones that we recommend to the board to make internal changes for itself. We think the legislature should establish minimum requirements for Perpich administrators of schools, as it has done for other schools. For example, the principals of Perpich schools should either be required to have an administrative license or they should be required to undergo training subject to the governing board's review. And we also think the legislature should update the Perpich Center statutes. Again, we think Perpich administrative leaders and the board should help provide suggestions, but we think particularly in areas like outreach, there's room for some legislative discussion on what the proper role of the agency should be. Finally, our report looks at the overall scope of the agency and suggests that the legislature give some consideration to what the scope of the agency should be. And when I say scope, again, what we're talking about is an agency that runs 2 schools and does statewide outreach. And so we posed 4 options in the last chapter of this report, ranging from keeping the agency's scope the way it is right now to eliminating the agency altogether. Of the agency's current functions, we think that the one that is the most tenuous is Crosswind School. So, perhaps the agency would be stronger if its activities were narrowed. I think there's an argument for that. But I think there's also an argument for the legislature saying, well, there's been a lot of change in the leadership of this agency and a largely new board, and maybe that is sufficient to keep the scope of the agency the same, but let the leadership of this agency try to get the agency back on track without changing the scope. Again, we offer no recommendations. We talk about the pluses and the minuses of these options. There are risks and consequences with them, but we do think this is a time to give a hard look to the agency's overall scope and what is financially sustainable. So overall, our evaluation concluded that the Perpich Center has, for more than 30 years, been an important resource in arts education, but in recent years, the board has not provided sufficient leadership. And the legislature should consider what it wants this agency to accomplish and then make whatever adjustments in statute or resources will enable the agency to achieve that. So, Mr. Chair, I will, unless there are questions, turn it over to Cecile Ferkel to say a few words about our financial audit.
Thank you, Mr. Alter, Ms. Ferkel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I am Cecile Ferkel. I'm the Deputy Legislative Auditor responsible for the Financial Audit Division. And at the same time that our Program Evaluation Division was doing the evaluation of the performance of Perpich Center, my auditors were looking at internal controls over its financial operations and also looking at how well it complied with certain legal compliance requirements that we examined. I'd like to acknowledge one of the auditors that worked on it with me here today is Sonia Johnson, who was the audit manager responsible for that audit. If I could have you please turn to the conclusion. It's on page 8. Overall, we concluded that Perpich Center did not have adequate internal controls and that it had not complied with many of the legal requirements that we tested for. This is the most serious conclusion that we give from our office. Typically, the conclusion is either that controls are adequate and the agency complied, that they're generally adequate and generally complied, which means that for the most part, things were pretty good, but we found some exceptions. However, in this case, we felt that the degree of internal control weaknesses and the degree of noncompliance was sufficient to reach a very negative conclusion. The report has 12 findings in it. The findings highlight a variety of errors and noncompliance that we found during the course of our audit. I would like to focus on a couple of areas that I think are the most significant. Finding 1, which is on page 9 there, talks about how when Perpich Center became responsible for Crosswinds School, because that school continued to be funded through the Department of Education through typical state aids, the school needed to report its financial activity through the Department of Education using the same coding and same categorizations of expenditures and other information that any other school would have to do. This was a requirement in the law when the school was administratively transferred over to Perpich also, that they continue this reporting. However, Perpich did not adequately plan for this responsibility, and they were notified after the first deadlines were missed from the Department of Education that they had not provided that financial information. In fact, a few months later, they were notified again by Education that they hadn't heard from Perpich and they didn't know what the plan was to provide this information. Last summer, Perpich entered into an audit contract with an audit firm to get that information into the format that it needed. However, it continued to miss deadlines. In October of 2016, the Department of Education notified Perpich Center that because it had not provided this financial information, the special education aid related to Crosswinds School was going to be reduced from nearly $500,000 to zero. So they were going to not provide them with the special ed money until the information was received into the Department of Education. We understand that by the end of December 2016, the information had been provided, and we believe that the Department of Education is currently assessing that information to determine to what extent they will restore that special ed funding and provide those financial resources to the schools. So we think this is an example of where the school really did not adequately anticipate the legal requirements and put at risk a really significant amount of money in an environment where, as Mr. Alter was explaining, their financial resources were declining already. So to lose this money was really, the potential of losing this money was really a significant thing. Also, if you could turn to finding 2, which is on the next page, page 10, and actually I'd like you to focus on the first bullet on page 11. This finding has to do with payroll expenses, and one of the things that we found through our testing was that nearly 25% of the payroll transactions the payroll payments that we selected for testing were not in agreement with the timesheets that employees had prepared and supervisors had authorized. Employees of the Perpich Center are state employees. They use the state's payroll system. Part of that system is an online reporting of an automated reporting by each employee of the time that they're working in each pay period. That timesheet moves electronically to the employee's supervisor, who then agrees with and authorizes payment for that time. However, when we looked at the actual payments that were being made and compared it back to the timesheets that had been prepared and authorized, we found discrepancies. And it's really the degree of discrepancies we have not encountered in other audits of other agencies. It really was above and beyond what we would typically see as usual or common. There are ways for payroll employees to make changes to information recorded on a timesheet and approved by a supervisor, because everybody makes mistakes. Maybe somebody's out sick on payday. Maybe they forgot to record a holiday. So we know that those things happen, but there are state policies that require, when those changes occur, that they be well documented and that they be approved and authorized to make sure that they are appropriate. Because 25% of the transactions that we looked at did not have that fundamental internal control to make sure that the payroll payments had integrity, we did additional analysis to determine whether or not anything inappropriate had happened in that process. Often when we looked at the adjustments that were made or the payroll that was entered, we could kind of see why they were making the changes, and we really did not detect anything that would lead us to think that there was fraud or inappropriate payments actually happening. But without those controls in place, that really is the thing that prevents inappropriate or excessive payments from occurring, and it really is. Payroll is $8 million of their $11 million budget. It's their biggest expense, and these controls are really important in the processing of payroll in the state's accounting system. So that finding, along with the $500,000, those were really the things that pushed us to concluding that internal controls were not adequate. The rest of the report has a variety of other things where, as you look through it, and you'll see that the errors we found, the lack of documentation was often an issue, where we couldn't see how a calculation was made. We couldn't see who had authorized a change, things that were inconsistent sometimes with the documentation that did exist. All of those things together, ultimately, we concluded that controls were not adequate, and there were many instances of noncompliance.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could just sum up then, you've heard, I think, a lot of findings and conclusions, a lot of strong findings and conclusions from both of our reports. We know it's a lot to digest, but we encourage the committee, obviously, to take time to think about this information, and we're here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for taking the time to hear us today.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the testifiers? We'll start Senator Kent, Clausen, and I'm sorry, I didn't catch it. Was it Dames? Senator Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the team from the Auditor's Office, thank you for your hard work on this. Just to get this out of the way, Crosswinds is in my district in Woodbury, so even before I ever considered running for office, I was aware of the school and some of its challenges, and so I do actually want to make one little comment. You did a good job of the history since 2012. I do think it's important to understand that the building capacity there, if I recall correctly, is about 650, and you've got it at about 389 in 2012. So capacity in that school has been an issue for some time, and so it's not like the things that happened with EMID and with the legislature were out of the blue and affected that. So I just want to state that for the record. And one thing, and if, I'll throw this out there if you guys want to comment, one of the concerns I've had, and this is again part of the history, at the time that EMID was getting out of running schools, they had one elementary school in Roseville, and then they had Crosswinds in Woodbury, and one acted as a feeder to the other. And when those two got separated, that, I believe, played an important role. And then the other thing that happened, Crosswinds is 6 through 10, and as a mom, those kinds of feeder questions for parents and kids are significant. What's going to happen to my kid after they finish there at 10th grade? Then what? And that becomes a deterrence for people to participate, especially after they've lost that initial part of that community. My sense at the time was a real question as to whether or not Crosswinds was sustainable. Many questions were asked during that process, and many reassurances were given that there was this wonderful vision for Crosswinds and that it was absolutely actionable and sustainable, and they had plans and they were going to address these things. So here we are. I appreciate your work, and it is because, certainly in my community and my proximity to that school, anecdotally, I've heard a lot of these things. This is why a number of us were pushing to have you get involved and do your fine work and help bring this information to light, because even though during hearings on budgets, these questions have been asked, I've asked some of them myself, and we were not getting the answers we need. I will say, and I'm going to push back, not that it's your fault, Ms. Ferkel, when you said the thing that they did not adequately anticipate the requirements with the conveyance. we very intentionally modeled the language for the conveyance of crosswinds off of existing charter school policies because we felt like that was something concrete and workable and schools knew how to do that. And it was absolutely no mystery to the leadership of Crosswinds that that's what was happening. And so that it took them 2 years is eye-opening, just to put that out there. So just saying that, I just want to get back to sort of what I consider to be one of the cruxes of the matter. And again, because I've had, conversations with a number of people, Senator Clausen came and we visited the school together. This issue of an executive director and the board. And yes, the board, as a governing board, has an ultimate responsibility. But if they're not being given the information that they need, having served on different volunteer boards and nonprofit organizations and different things like that, you always get your packet in advance. My understanding is they didn't even get their budget in advance to be able to review it and ask the questions. So my question from a legislative perspective, I'm getting here finally, is as we look to move forward, it seems like there was an unhealthy interaction there. And how do we keep from being in that position again? Because there was a board. I am very appreciative that, the new board members are coming in with a full understanding of their obligation. But how did we get here? And how do we keep from ending up in the same spot again? Because I think it's not adequate to just say the board needs to do better. And any thoughts you have on that, I would love to hear. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Senator Kent, let me just offer a couple of thoughts. I do think in this report, we could have looked at some of the things that happened in the past and said, well, that's water under the bridge. As I said at the beginning, the executive director is gone. Maybe there wasn't enough information provided to the board. Maybe she's to blame for that, but she's gone. I think that there is in this report enough information about kind of things that weren't done well administratively that I hope it is a bit of a blueprint going forward. We didn't want to just erase that because it happened. We heard complaints about it and we validated that there were issues. And so I hope, yes, I want the board to be more active going forward and to provide more direction. I also think that there has to be, on the administrative side, staff who are forthcoming with the board, who provide them with information up front. That's why we're recommending, for example, really basic stuff like providing enrollment and test score data on a regular basis to the board. I agree. I think in looking at information the board got, the packets have been fairly thin, and even the budget document itself is pretty bare bones in terms of trying to understand it. And there are things that somebody should be able to understand from that budget, but that you can't. You can't look at that budget and understand that a portion, and it's a significant portion of the teacher salaries at the Arts High School, are being put in the outreach category. They're just things that I think could be far more transparent. So my hope is that there's something in this report that will be instructive, not just to the board, but to the administrative staff going forward.
Mr. Chair, if I could also add, Mr. Chair and Senator Kent and members, this committee actually has a unique position in making sure the board is the type of board you want it to be. You are the folks who confirm those board appointments. So as board members come before you, I would recommend that you pose these questions to them and you satisfy yourself that the folks that have been nominated for that board have the skills you're looking for, and you have a unique opportunity really to impress upon them what matters to you. And you can require them to come back and report to you. This committee in particular, out of all of the committees in the legislature, have some authority and have some power to make that board be responsive to what you want it to be.
Senator Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And once again, thank you. Your office has done once again, a wonderful job in laying out some of the issues and helping us understand. You know, as I've listened to this, it's hard to not say we've had personnel issue failure here, we've had oversight issue failure, and we've got systems failures along the line. So part of my reasoning is, where do you start in some ways? But I have a question, series of questions on slide 5, appropriation. Does that slide take into consideration the per pupil funding and state appropriations, or just one or the other?
Mr. Chair, Senator Clausen, that is only the appropriations and not the per pupil funding that goes to Crosswinds.
Okay, so we would see that line go up, obviously, with the per pupil funding. Okay, thank you. You mentioned in 2014 you did not administer the MCA mathematics exam. Was that because of opting out, or did the school make a decision just to not administer?
Mr. Chair, Senator Clausen, let me just give a little bit of background. When we were looking at the test scores for the schools, and obviously you can go to the Department of Education website and see a history there, and there was no information for 2014, and our first call was to the Department of Education to say, why would there not be information for a school for a given year? Like, you know, it's one thing to have a reduced, or students opting out, but you would have some students taking the test, and it puzzled them too. They didn't know. They said there is no good reason. So we went to Perpich officials, and in a conversation with the executive director, she told us that in that year, the agency officials decided that they would rather have students spend their time preparing for ACT tests. And so she said that there was some discussion with the Department of Education about that, and that they decided that year not to administer those tests. We went back to the Department of Education, talked with the head of the testing unit for the department, and they said, we didn't authorize any school to not give tests. It's a required test. And so I think it is, you know, I should state that in 2015 and 2016, Perpich went back to administering the MCAs at the Arts High School. But it is a bit puzzling why they, in 2014, just abandoned it completely.
Do you know from the department, was there a letter of reprimand or any consequence that was provided?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Clausen, not to my knowledge, and as far as I know, we brought it to their attention. I don't know if there was any follow-up.
Okay. Well, having been a high school principal, I know there's some unique costs with arts programs. There's dance floors that are very expensive. There's in the visual arts, kilns and other equipment. In the performing arts, you have royalties that you have to pay. You blow a bulb in your theater and it's a $60 cost per bulb. So I'm kind of familiar with those things. So part of me says, you know, I can understand a little bit some of the cost issues, but when you get down to it, in a small, you know, I keep looking at economy of scale of a school that has so few, and I know that as a principal, sometimes you wear a lot of different hats. Did they have a business manager? Did they have an RH person? Did they have people in these positions that could actually manage and do the day-to-day business in those areas? Purchase order requests and so on.
Mr. Chair, Senator Clausen, they do have a business office. I will say that in business office and HR type functions, there's been a lot of turnover at Perpich. It has been, I think, a challenge for them, and it perhaps was reflected in some of our financial audit findings.
The other piece I have a hard time understanding is that, you know, in a school, most people are salaried. You don't get overtime for putting in 80 hours a week or whatever. And yet there seemed to be a lot of time sheeting that was going on. And were these people that were brought in to put on productions? In other words, there was a costumer that was hired for 6 weeks to put on a you know, a particular theater presentation, or where do these timesheets originate?
Mr. Chair and Senator, I'll answer that question. As state employees, the majority of state employees complete timesheets every pay period. It's more a part of their being a state agency as opposed to being a school.
Well, these
So-
are licensed teachers.
Yes.
Senator Clausen, may I? you're touching on a question I had, if I could just kind of follow up. So is there any, as a state employee, would they be eligible for overtime? Would there be any violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act that would cause us then to be in violation of federal law? Besides the fact that you had employees signing their own timesheets at some point in time?
Mr. Chair and Senators, they do have a teacher's contract that does provide for certain additional pay, like, after-school activities and coaching or, being in charge of certain things, similar to perhaps how another school would run. But they still would be preparing timesheets to document their typical hours.
And Ms. Ferkel, from your investigation, is it possible or probable that, because it seems to me that it almost looks like, when I look at your other finding regarding the exceeding the vacation, almost like comp time was being used. Did you find any sort of correlation between the inconsistency in the timesheets and the inconsistency on the vacation schedules?
Mr. Chair, which finding are you talking about? That bottom bullet on page 11? Or just some other particular ones?
It'd be the correlation between finding 1 and finding 3, I believe. Or was it finding 10?
Yeah,
I think
Mr. Chair, what we were seeing there was, as we pulled samples of transactions and looked at how things were being done, this particular one on finding 3 had to do with some administrative staff and not with any of the teachers that were accruing vacation and unable to reduce their time to the annual maximum amount. And normally, a state employee would lose that additional vacation time and their balance would be brought down to the maximum. Several employees were granted permission to maintain their higher balances with the expectation that they would then deplete those additional balances by a certain date. Our audit saw that the depletion of the additional vacation did not happen and that those hours were still available to the employees. So that's what the particular situation was there, is very narrow. And then on finding 10, that has to do with that online process, that automated process of preparing your own timesheet and having your supervisor approve it. It's kind of before the point where we saw the adjustments happening. We were looking at completed and approved timesheets and then saying, hey, but that's not the way you made the payment. In finding 10, we're looking at the process of completing those timesheets and finding that piece of it also was not working well, where sometimes someone other than the employee was filling out the timesheet, sometimes someone other than the primary supervisor was approving it. We typically see more errors in this across state agencies, and there are certain state procedures to require review and subsequent approval of those exceptions. And that's what we felt was deficient here, is that they were not circling back around.
Senator Clausen, I'd like to move on to Senator Dames and get back to you if possible. One follow-up.
One follow-up, thank you, Mr. Chair. Is that a consistent policy across all agencies? In other words, if we went to the Minnesota Zoo, would we find all employees there filling out timesheets?
Mr. Chair and Senator, state employees within some departments do have an option to do what's called negative time reporting, where they are paid for 80 hours in a pay period, but if they take vacation or they use sick leave, they have to report that. So it's kind of a default to the 80. That's a pretty small piece of overall state employment. Most employees have to do positive time reporting and report how they've used their whole 80 hours. It can be especially important where there are different funding sources. So how much time did an employee at DNR spend on a project that's related to the Game and Fish Fund, and how much time did they spend on a project related to the Outdoor Heritage Fund? A place like the zoo, perhaps there could be a couple of employees that are using negative time reporting, but by and large, when we do audits, we see that the majority of state employees use positive time reporting and have to account for all of their hours.
Yeah. Thank you, and again, thank you for a job well done. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Dames.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to you folks, the that did the audit, thank you very much for your work. Unfortunately, we're finding there's a lot of problems here, and I think that that's a real issue. You know, we look at some of these things, I can understand maybe how they could go astray a little bit, but when you look at all the issues there are, you start wondering how much of this was intentional and how much of it was just something that happened. And I think that brings up a real concern, and I think it's something we're going to have some real strong discussions on in the future before we move much further with this process. But it's my understanding that statutorily that the Perpich School is supposed to have a student body that's comprised of students equally from all the different congressional districts. I'm assuming that's not happening. Would that assumption, number one, be correct? And then also, could you tell me, it looks like the total enrollment in 2016 was 187. Could you tell me the makeup of that 187? Would you happen to know what congressional districts and how many numbers is in each district?
Mr. Chair and Senator James, first of all, the language that you referred to, which I've got somewhere here, it's a little bit odd language that's in statute, and we've, I know, debated in our office about exactly how it should be interpreted, because it says that the Perpich Center Board, quote, must plan for the enrollment of pupils on an equal basis from each congressional district. Maybe the legislature was in fact trying to say there should be equal numbers from each congressional district, but that term "plan for" is a little bit odd. So I'm not exactly sure what was intended, but I think it's safe to say that the legislature wanted a lot of representation, whether it was exactly equal or not, from the different parts of the state. And that was certainly when Perpich was set up, and frankly, part of Governor Perpich's concern in creating this school and advocating for it was that he felt that students from the part of Minnesota that he grew up in and other parts of outstate Minnesota didn't have the opportunities that other students did. In terms of the current breakdown of students, and we will get that to you, we'll get you a breakdown by congressional district, but as I said in summary, 78% of the students currently are from the 7-county Twin Cities metro area, and so 22% from outstate. And as I mentioned, there is one congressional district, which is, I believe it's District 7, which is mostly western Minnesota, does not have any students currently at the Arts High School. So as we looked at the history, and the history we have is one by congressional district going back for about 20 years, you go back to the mid-1990s, and there were more students from outstate Minnesota that were at the Arts High School, and that has gradually changed over time. And we think that's an issue that needs some discussion by the board and perhaps by the legislature. But we will get you information by congressional district.
Are there any other questions? Senator Ecke.
Mr. Chair and our auditors, just a question that came up. You interviewed the employees. Was there any interviews conducted with current students, past students, or families on the success of the school?
Mr. Chair and Senator Utke, we interviewed, let me back off from that. We were interested in doing, I think, more interviews than we did with either parents or students. One of the challenges was that neither school has a parent-teacher association, which would have been kind of a logical vehicle to go to talk with parents. We did go to one meeting of something called the Parent Advisory Council at Crosswinds. I think there were 2 parents there on the night that we attended. So there hasn't been kind of very active organizations for involving parents. I think that was one of the challenges. We did happen to have a number of discussions with parents, but I think we certainly felt that was something that we could have done more with had we had a good way of kind of identifying parents who have had some level of activity within either of the schools. And the same thing on the student front. We initially tried to find out, is there any sort of a student government or student representatives or a class president or anything like that, and there really wasn't anything that we were told existed within the school. So we never did any specific outreach with the students. We've certainly been aware of through websites and other things, some testimonials that students as well as alumni have provided about the school. And we read some of that, but we didn't have any sit-down meetings with groups of students.
Yeah, let me get one here first. Just real quick, was it a follow-up to that, or?
To Dean's.
Oh, go ahead. Senator,
Mr. Chair, auditors, thank you again for the report. I'm going to take a chance to look through some of this. This is good information, so I appreciate that. But to Senator Dame's point, where he talked about the requirements that students come from all congressional districts, did you guys find in any place that they did any specific outreach efforts to try to reach out to the students in all the congressional districts to try to fulfill that requirement? And also, did you find that they operated any type of mentor or extension programs in outstate Minnesota to fulfill the state requirement there?
Mr. Chair, Senator Eichhorn, let me answer the last part first while I remember it. I'm not aware of any mentor types of programs, and maybe they exist, but I'm not aware of them, but I don't remember hearing about any. In terms of the nature of the recruitment efforts that the Arts High School does, and I suspect that it has varied over time, but one of the things that we observed is there was a period of time for several years between roughly 2010 and 2015 where the Perpich Center for most of that period did not have a permanent employee who was an admissions director. There was a temporary employee whose job it was to handle some of the recruitment. But I think some people that we talked with said that was an important thing, that they didn't have somebody who was a permanent employee dedicated to doing that who might make those trips. I do know that certainly in recent times, some of the people who have been in charge of admissions have gone to events around the state where they can kind of get the Perpich name out there, but they've also gone to community centers, they've gone directly to schools, and obviously that's a bit of a hit and miss process. You can't hit everybody even if you do a 10-day trip through northern Minnesota. But I do know that, for example, last year when there was a full-time admissions director on staff, I believe there was a northern Minnesota swing where they hit as many communities as they could, and a southern Minnesota swing. So there have been efforts, but I think it'd be hard to say exactly how those have changed over time.
follow-up?
Thank you. And overall, based on your findings, do you feel that that you would say that they fulfilled their duties to be a statewide resource for arts education?
Mr. Chair, Senator Eichhorn, I think that's one where it's hard to know exactly what the benchmark is for those efforts being sufficient. But what I would say is that there has been a change in the outreach that the Perpich Center has done in the nature of its outreach, and there's room for debate about what the right strategy is. And let me say a few more words about that. Some of the programs that the Perpich Center has invested in the last certainly 2 or 3 years, specifically programs like Turnaround Arts and the Arts Integration Program, are ones where the staff from the agency may be working with the same schools and some of the same staff in those schools over an extended period of time. And that may be a good thing, but at the same time then you may be sacrificing the number of teachers or the number of school districts that you're working with statewide. And so I think that's a point that deserves some attention. We mentioned that there has been a reduction in the number of what are called education specialists that Perpich used to employ in each arts area. So you don't have somebody right now who's a music educator and who spends their time working with music educators around the state or in some other areas. And a lot of that work that Perpich used to do with the education specialists used to be, it might be a one-time thing where they'd work with teachers on a workshop or to, on one occasion, help them align their curriculum with state standards. And so I think those education specialists were having a wider reach in getting to more teachers and more districts. One other thing I would mention is that the programs that Perpich has focused on, I would say more in recent years, programs like Turnaround Arts and Arts Integration, have worked more with classroom teachers probably than they have with arts teachers. And what they're trying to do is get arts and regular teachers to work together in those schools. But again, I think it's perhaps part of the reason why some of the arts teachers around the state say, there's not as much for us that Perpich is doing compared with what we used to get. So it's hard to answer, is it enough what Perpich is doing? But I would say that some of the arts community around the state, the arts teachers in schools would say, we're not getting as much help as we used to get. We'd like to get more. We'd like to get more specialized help. But, you know, Perpich has been faced with some choices, and the direction they've gone has been in certain programs and not in others. And so I think there's room for discussion.
Let me just follow up on that. It's not the question I was going to ask before, but you mentioned there's no strategic plan. But is there reporting to the board, or are there metrics for success that tells the board or tells the leadership their effectiveness in meeting those three items? So for example, if they used to work with art teachers and now they're working with classroom teachers, do they have a metric to test that success?
Mr. Chair, and specifically focusing in the outreach area, I would like to say that there was, but I would say there really hasn't been that kind of reporting. We assembled, for purposes of this report, well, we first went to Perpich and we said, tell us what information you've got about outreach in each of these programs in terms of the number of teachers reached, number of school districts. And what we found was that the information from recent years was not complete. And so we worked with staff at Perpich. In some cases, we went to, we mentioned the regional centers, we went to the coordinators of regional centers and said, can you compile for us information that gives us a sense of your reach? So we pulled a lot of that together, but I think that indicates that there hasn't been real consistent or comprehensive reporting to the board. And I would say that's not just the case in outreach. Again, we didn't see regular information on enrollment and test scores. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been some reporting. We certainly heard from the executive director that she has reported things to the board or proposed measures that the agency should track. But we also didn't see a lot of follow-up on that, and we didn't see a lot of that going to the board in writing. So it seemed to be very informal and not the kind of thing that was then followed through on from year to year.
Thank you. And then you mentioned the cost per student at, you know, more than twice the average cost per student in a K-12 system. And yet when I take an $11.7 million budget by 316 students, I come out to more like $37,000 on average. Can you help me understand the difference between what you shared in your report and that figure? And then as a follow-up to that, were you able to break down the costs in such a way that we can understand why the costs are so much higher? Kind of to follow up on Senator Clausen's earlier question, why does it cost so much more to educate a student at either one of these schools?
Mr. Chair, on your first point, there are a lot of costs other than direct school costs that are within the Perpich Center. Obviously, they have an administrative staff, but they also have these outreach programs of various sorts we've been talking about. So when we talk about the cost per student for the Arts High School or the cost per student for Crosswinds, we're simply taking the overall budget or the overall spending level and then applying that to the number of students in a given year. So that's the difference. In terms of why it might be expensive, you know, we've broken down the costs in a number of ways, and I have to keep going back to, in my mind, the declining enrollment as a critical factor. And let me just give you an example with the Arts High School. If we look at all of the Arts High School's expenditures and apply the number of pupils to them to come up with a cost per pupil, and we look at that over the last few years, and so in 2016, the cost per pupil, if you include all costs, including the dorm cost and the food service cost, was over $21,000 per student. If we go back to 2012, not that long ago, but at a time when the student population was in the high 200s rather than today 180 or so, At that time, the cost per student was about $13,000 per student. So $13,000 in 2012, over $21,000 in 2016, and a lot of that is due to a decline in the student population. So I mean, part of what that says to me is if this school were operating closer to the capacity that is specified in state statute, which is a capacity of 310, the cost would be more in the ballpark of, they would still be above what we're seeing for an average school district, but they'd be probably more to your liking. And, you know, I think the point was made earlier that arts can be an expensive thing. You know, when you have media arts and visual arts and the supplies and the equipment that are required for that, yes, there can be additional expenses for that. And so that's something that might kind of boost your cost. I would also say that the Arts High School has not had a large special education population. So, you know, on the other hand, it hasn't had that driving the cost up. So it's hard to tease it out, but I keep coming back to the number of students and the impact that that has had on the cost per student for the school.
Well, it seems to me, especially when you said, I think, 8 or 9 million of the 11 million was salary and benefits, it seems to me that it's a high variable cost business that should be able to maintain some sort of cost per student unless there's a high percentage of fixed costs that we're not seeing in this report.
Mr. Chair, you know, I guess, again, when your student numbers drop, even if your costs stay the same, your cost per student is going to go up, and I think that's what we've seen. There was also an adjustment that the Perpich Center did in around 2014 where they allocated more of their administrative costs to the schools because they thought that's where those costs were really generated from. So there has been some accounting change, but I think it is largely related to the student decline.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add, you know, I think about it in terms of Perpich must need a dance instructor, whether there's 20 students in the dance program or 5 students in the dance program. So while the staff cost may be variable to some extent, it may not be as variable as maybe a traditional school.
Okay.
Something to think about.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, any closing comments you'd like to make, Ms. Randall or Mr. Elter?
Mr. Chair, just thank you for hearing the reports and listening to what we have to say. Of course, as you know, we're always available as the committee continues to consider what we've said here. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for this. It was eye-opening information. Is there anyone from, I understand that we have some guests from Perpich that may want to say a few words or not? Welcome to the Senate Education Committee. If you just state your name and position for the record, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senators, for the opportunity to address you this afternoon. My name is Julie Workman, and I was appointed to the Perpich Board in July. And I would like to take an opportunity to really give my heartfelt thanks to the auditors who did this immense amount of work. As a board member, it will be so helpful to have all of the issues very logically delineated with some suggestions for how we can move forward. Without this, I think we would really be spinning our wheels. My background is I taught for 36 years, orchestra teacher in the Rochester Public Schools. I retired in 2010. I ran for the school board and was elected. At that time, our school system had some major conflicts with superintendents and some other issues. At that time that I was elected, we had 5 new board members out of 7. So I think when you think of 9 or 10 new board members out of 15, it seems like a lot to put on new board members. But my experience is that it's very doable. Our first charge was to hire an interim superintendent. That happened at the second meeting. We had to hire a superintendent. We had to pull the community together. community members, staff, superintendent, 2 school board members to write a 5-year strategic plan. So I'm very much familiar with some of the challenges that this board faces in moving ahead. However, I'm also very confident that we can get this job done. I was not on the board when all of these problems occurred. But as I said, I think we can really do a lot moving forward. It's going to be dependent on a number of things. Teamwork. The board, the staff, the parents, the community, legislators all need to be involved in solving this problem. We have to be accountable, we have to be transparent, and we have to communicate. Because without those 3 things, success is going to be much more difficult. And finally, like I said, these were adult problems that were caused for students. We are really supposed to be serving more students in outstate Minnesota, students who may be in a situation where there are only 1 or 2 like them, or maybe they're the only one. These are the students who desperately need to be able to advance their artistic creativity and to be in a situation of cohorts where other students are like they are. And I think that's extremely important. So these are adult problems. I think we can solve them. To borrow from the motto of the Mayo Clinic, the needs of the student come first. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Mike Zabel, and I'm the Interim Director for the Purpose Center for Arts Education. I'm here with 2 of the 4 members of the transition team, and those team members include Ahava Silky Jones, who's the principal of the Arts High School, Deborah Kelly, who's our Innovation Director, and Ekpe Akpan, who's our HR Director. I would just like to read a statement, and then if members have specific questions, I would be hopeful to answer them, or I will ask my colleagues over here to answer. The transition team would like to acknowledge the work of the OLA, and we respectfully ask the legislature for some time to allow the Purpose Center for Arts Education Board of Directors to complete their search for a new executive director. After that position has been hired, there will be some strategic planning that the board and the executive director will embark on, and then the board and the executive director will set the strategic course for the agency. Until that time, the transition team will continue to keep the day-to-day agency operation running and continue to educate students through both schools and provide professional developments to teachers throughout the state of Minnesota. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Senator Kent.
A very brief one. It's my understanding that the goal is to have a new executive director on board by July 1st. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Senator Kent, that is my understanding as well.
I have a quick question, Mr. Zabel. I'm looking through your response to the legislative auditor. It seems like you put some of the blame on lack of controls based on insufficient financial resources, but yet, from what I saw in the report, we're talking just very simple procedural methods that don't require additional financial resources, especially when you're more than 2 times the average cost per student. And then when I look through your response to each individual finding, I only find that you have a target date on finding 4, which is the capital asset inventory. What is your timeline for resolving the rest of these? And do we in fact have a sense of urgency, not only from you, but from the board to get these done in an expedited fashion?
Mr. Chair, the responses that you are referring to, we have implemented a lot of the recommendations that the OLA had immediately. So there wasn't a need to include a timeline because we've already implemented those. We've made some additional role changes so that staff are more accountable, and we're doing a lot more documentation. We have a new HR director, and she has taken on some of those tasks in the HR. So we have accomplished a lot of the follow-through with regards to documentation. So the timelines are just for those items that we are still working towards completing.
So is it fair to say that the only one we're working on now, and we've got the rest resolved, the only one we're working on is the capital asset inventory?
Mr. Chair, no, I believe there are a couple other ones that have timelines.
I think part of the concern is that there are still a number of issues that the legislative auditor highlighted that are still carryovers from 2012. And that's why, and being in a regulated industry, I know when we have to talk to our regulators, we have to provide a estimated date of completion on every finding, not just some of them. And since this is a budget year, we're going to be reviewing your budget request. Is it possible that you would be able to provide a summary to this committee? Let's say by the end of February or so, on the progress that you've made, and maybe more specific plans on the outstanding findings that you haven't addressed yet.
Mr. Chair, absolutely, we can do that.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Zabel or Ms. Workman? Okay, well, seeing none, is there any other business that needs to come before the committee? All right, seeing none, we'll be adjourned.